All right, so the last war that we're going to look at when we're looking at the French conflicts in North America is the 7 Years' War. So the 7 Years' War happened from 1756 to 1763. 7 years. I wonder where the name of the war came from. Oh yeah, and here in this picture we can see British forces advancing on French forces which are retreating. Okay, you can see this is how combat was fought back then, where you'd line up with your musket in a line and you'd march across the field and shoot at your enemies. So where did the 7 Years' War happen? Well, it actually was a global war. It was happening all across the world. If we look at this map, we see Britain and their allies in blue, and France and their allies in green. And these red boxes represent zones of conflict. So there was wars, battles going on across the world, in Europe, Asia, Africa, South America, and North America. So we're going to focus on the North American ones, specifically the ones in the Canada region, okay? Not really in the South United States or in the Caribbean, okay? So who was involved in this massive global war? Well, there's the global groups. So across the world, there was Great Britain and their allies, like Prussia, okay, and Portugal, versus France and their allies, such as the Habsburgs or the Austrians, Russia, and the Spanish, and their indigenous allies. Okay, so zooming in on Canada more specifically, we have Great Britain versus the Kingdom of France, and that was the British American colonies, the Haudenosaunee, okay, the Cherokee, and a few other groups, and they were versus the Kingdom of France and New France, and New France was teamed up with a lot of indigenous allies, okay? The British really only had the Haudenosaunee, but the French had the Wabanaki Confederacy, which includes like the Mi'kmaq. Then we had the Abenaki, the Mi'kmaq, Algonquin, Lenape, Ojibwe, Ottawa, the Shawnee, and the Wendat, or the Huron, okay? So those are the groups that were fighting. The New France and their indigenous allies, a whole bunch, versus the British colonies and the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. Okay. So what happened during this war? Well, the 7 Years' War occurred in Europe because of commercial and colonial rivalry between Britain and France, and the conflict in Germany between Prussia and Austria. This conflict spilled across the globe. All right. The North American dispute was whether the upper Ohio River Valley was part of the British Empire or part of the French Empire. If you remember, at the end of the Queen Anne's War, okay, that middle part beside the 13 colonies and underneath the French colonies was a little bit disputed, okay? So this battle was over the disputed territory. The population of the disputed area was predominantly occupied by British settlers, but the French had made great inroads into exploration, trade, and alliances with indigenous peoples of the region. The conflict ended. So after a bunch of battles were fought across the world, the conflict ended with the Treaty of Paris in 1763, during which France gave up its North American territories to Great Britain. So you can tell, if France gave up all of their colonies in North America to Great Britain, okay, like in Canada, that means they lost hardcore. So ended the series of bloody conflicts in North America between the colony of New France and the British colonies, for now. Okay, so this is important to know because the French are no longer a power in North America, like the Canada area of North America, by the end of this war. Okay, now at the end of this war, the British take over completely. So why did this war happen? Okay, what were the causes? So first cause was imperialism, right? European nations wanted to continue growing their empires and colonies, resulting in more and more conflicts breaking out. Mercantilism. European nations wanted to increase the profits of their colonies while making sure they thwarted their enemies' economies, which involved wars in Europe too. And politics. So this massive global war started in Europe. Okay, the 7 Years' War broke out due to years of political ambition, alliances, and imperial goals across the world. So it was really a big old war to see who was the number one European power. So why is this war important? What are the effects? So the main effect that we're going to focus on is the Treaty of Paris of 1763. So the Treaty of Paris of 1763 came after the French lost their forts of Louisbourg and Quebec, along with the city of Montreal, to the British in a series of battles. The treaty gave Great Britain complete control of the French colonies in Canada, meaning that the French, Canadians, and Indigenous peoples were now being ruled by the British. Before, they weren't. Now, all of a sudden, after one war, 7 years of war, boop, now they're controlled by the British. But this massive victory came at a cost to the British, though, and they were running out of money. Okay? If only they had 13 rich colonies available to tax. Okay, so let's zoom in on this map and have a closer look at what happened from the Treaty of Paris. So if we look at this map on the left, this was before the 7 Years' War started, okay, in the year 1754. We can see in purple all the land that the French controlled. Okay. Then, if we look at green, the green territory is the stuff that the British control. So the British control Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, and the Hudson Bay because of Queen Anne's War. Okay? But they've had the 13 colonies almost the whole time. So the French had lost Acadia, their control in Newfoundland, and their control in Hudson Bay to the British from Queen Anne's War. Now at the end of this war, at the end of the Seventh War, they're completely wiped off the map. Okay, all they have is a few little colonies in the Caribbean. Other than that, the Spanish took a huge chunk of their land. Okay, and the British controlled the rest. So now Britain controlled basically everything in North America, except for two little islands called Saint Pierre and Miquelon, and those still belong to France today. They're just underneath Newfoundland. But two little islands versus all of this massive territory, that's a huge loss for the French. So this war is really important because it switches control of North America from the French to the British. So how did it contribute to Canada? How did the 7 Years' War contribute to Canada? Well, the battle at the Plains of Abraham was the final battle for control of Canada between France and Great Britain. Okay, it was the final battle. The English general James Wolfe managed to sneak his soldiers up a cliff at night and launched a surprise attack on the fortress of Quebec after weeks and weeks of siege, of bombarding it. Okay? This resulted in a British victory and gave control of all of New France to Great Britain. Of course, after they captured Quebec, they went down to capture Montreal, but really the battle at the Plains of Abraham is the massive final battle. There was little ones after that while they did their cleanup, but the battle of the Plains of Abraham is so important because the British did a sneak attack, captured the fortress, which gave them victory in the war. It is because of this war that Canada today is an English majority country that has the British monarch as our head of state. Okay, so now it's time for the questions. So first question, who was the main opponent of New France during the 7 Years' War in the North America part? Okay, this is New France we're talking about, their main opponent. What was the main reason for the 7 Years' War? When was the 7 Years' War? When did it happen? From what year did it start to what year did it end? Where was the 7 Years' War fought? Where did they fight it? Why was the 7 Years' War caused? What caused it to happen? The important effect of the 7 Years' War is... And finally, how did the 7 Years' War contribute to Canada?